How's it? And welcome to part 2 of my wheel building videos. I'm Conrad Davies, and today we're going to talk about truing the wheel and then a little bit about the parts that you'll need to build a wheel successfully. So let me quickly run you through a couple of tips on things that you might need that aren't really commonly known in the average bicycle shop. So the first thing, let's just have a look at the spokes. This is a standard bicycle spoke. It's not butted. In other words, it's the same length from end to end. This is 2 millimeters from this end to this end, and then it has a thread on it. You get a couple of different standards. I prefer to work with spokes that are double butted. So in other words, that means that there's a 2 millimeter end here and a 2 millimeter end here. And you can't really see it that well, but down the middle piece here, it's actually thinner. In this case, they're 1.6 millimeters in the middle. I like really big double butting. In other words, a big difference between the end and the piece in the middle here. And the reason for that is because the spoke becomes more springy. Common spokes are straight gauge or non-double butted 2 millimeter spokes. Then you get 2 by 1.6 by 1.8, 2 by 1.8 by 2, a whole bunch of different sizes. The reason for the double butting, other than the fact that it makes the spoke lighter, so you're essentially going to build a lighter set of wheels, but the main difference is, if I push on either end of the spoke, I don't have to push very hard and I get some flex in the spoke. In the case of a 2 millimeter straight spoke, I can push as hard as I want on both ends of the spoke. I'm just going to get the spoke to go into my finger at some point. So they just don't flex. The reason for having this little bit of flex in the spoke is that your spoke is basically one of the points of suspension in your bike. So it just makes the wheel feel a little bit more compliant, so the rim can move around within the spokes just slightly to make the wheel feel a little bit more compliant. So your tire gives you a little bit of compliance, your rim gives you a little bit of compliance, and then obviously your suspension on your bike, if you have suspension on your bike, gives you a little bit of compliance. The other thing is that if the spoke can flex in the middle, it's not flexing at the ends. Now usually spokes break either at the J-bend or very close to it because, like I showed you in the last video, the spoke can move in that hole that the spoke goes through the hub. As I said, you can use the little brass washer like this. It's so tiny. The tiny little brass washer, you can put that on the end of the spoke. It's on the end of the spoke so that it makes up for that little bit of space in the hub. But then you've got the other end. The other end is where your nipple is. And every time the spoke moves, as the wheel rotates, when it gets to the bottom of the rotation, the spoke will move slightly, and that will move the spoke or the nipple in the rim, and that can also cause flex. Now, if you can take that flex away from either end of the spoke and put it in the middle, then you don't have that problem anymore. Your wheel should stand, as we call it, or last longer. Now, on the nipple question, we were talking about different kinds of nipples. I like to build with aluminium nipples. It's mainly just for the bling though. It is a slightly lighter alternative, so if you're trying to build the ultimate lightweight wheel set, then aluminium nipples will help that, but I just like the colors that you get. So aluminium nipples come in many different kinds of configurations. In fact, most nipples come in a lot of different configurations. This is a standard old school with a flathead screwdriver in the end of it. This particular one comes from Pilar, and it's got a little four-sided tool that you can put on it to turn it in, and that little tool is like this tool over here. You can then put the nipple in the end of the tool and it'll stand on the end of the tool. The cool thing about this is that I can use this tool to put the nipple through the rim and also to screw it onto the spoke. Just makes life a little bit easier. As you saw, I built Eliana's wheels with standard with a flat, and they worked fine. It's just a little bit harder to get them in, but you can use that little trick I showed you in the last video. If you are building carbon fiber wheels, it's probably best to use a brass nipple. Brass nipples are a little bit harder. They also don't erode as quickly, so there won't be much of a chance of erosion. And then they are a little bit stronger as well, so there's that advantage as well. Just going back to spoke lengths and nipple, there is a relationship between them. In the case of Eliana's wheels, I built them perfectly, so the spoke went through the nipple to the point that it just got flush with the top of the nipple once it got through the other side. And what that means is that there's enough spoke sticking through the nipple to support the head of the nipple. So in other words, if it was too short and the spoke was sitting like that, then the nipple wouldn't be supported over here and this piece can just break off. With her wheels, I threaded it on. At the finished product, they are threaded on so that they exactly sit flush with the end, So the spoke is supporting the inside of the nipple. If you're in the situation where your spokes are too short, just slightly too short, again, it's best to use a brass nipple, because the brass nipple doesn't need the support of the spoke for the head part of it to not break off. So again, you can use a brass nipple for that. Also, you can use longer nipples. So this is a longer nipple than that. For example, I think this is 12 millimeters and that's like 15 millimeters. So that extra 3 millimeters will obviously give you a little bit of a gap to play with if your spokes are too short and you haven't got the budget, or you can't find the exact right spokes or whatever. Flip side is, with these nipples like this, DT Swiss makes nipples like this, and Pilar makes nipples like this, as I said. Here you can run a spoke that's slightly longer, so the spoke can penetrate further through the nipple and it won't be exposed on the inside of the rim. So that's an advantage there. So there are a couple of tricks that you can use for making sure that your spokes and your nipples work well together. So now let's just have a look at the finishing process of how to finish a wheel so that it's centered, so that it doesn't have a hop in it, so the spokes are correctly tensioned and ready to go on your bike. So now that we have the wheel laced up, which you can obviously check out in the previous video from last Friday, we have to basically get it centered and the spokes tightened up or pulled up tight so that the wheel actually works like a wheel should and doesn't flop around. So it's still pretty floppy, although it's not very floppy. The first thing to do is to find your valve hole. Once you've got your valve hole, you're going to start from there. You always want to work in circles back to your valve hole, so the valve is just a good place to start, so you know where you've started, so when you get back around there, you know that you've done one revolution of the wheel. Now what I normally do is, I know that a wheel takes about 7 or 8 turns to start getting quite tight on each nipple. So from this point, from the nipple having been turned onto the end of the thread on the spoke, I know that another 7 or 8 turns and it's going to be pretty damn tight. So what I do is, I start by doing 4 rotations, full turns on each nipple, all the way around the wheel, just to see where it's going to be. It takes a little bit of time. It's nice to do this a little bit slowly, so don't ever rush wheel building, because if you rush wheel building, they just turn out badly. So it's a little bit of a patience exercise. So I'm going to start and I'm going to turn each nipple. The first thing you'll notice as soon as the spokes get tensioned up is the wheel starts to center itself pretty well, especially if you've ordered the right length spokes, which I think I did, so the wheel is coming up quite centered now. So now's the part where the patience starts to really kick in, or the need for patience really starts to kick in. Now you start to pull up the spokes a little bit slower. So as I said, I did 4 on the first revolution. The spokes are still very loose, but they're definitely tightened up quite well, and I can feel that the spokes on the left side, or on the disc side, are much looser than the ones on the right side. So I can tell you now that I'm going to be turning the left ones more than the right ones, just to get the wheel completely tightened up and centered. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to do 1 revolution on the drive side, or the right side, and 2 revolutions on each spoke on the left hand side, and we'll see how that goes. So the spokes are tightening up nicely. They're pretty even all the way around, but as you can hear there's a point where the wheel touches the gauge, and that therefore it's time to start actually truing. So this is where we start to compensate. Basically, you still continue to work in 4 revolutions, but I know that over here the spokes don't need to be as tightened up as they do over there, and there's something slightly out. It was probably a spoke length difference or something. There's some reason why the wheel isn't 100% straight anymore. So now I start again at the valve hole. There's my starting point, and I'm going to work around the rim. I can see from the top here that the wheel is slightly off center. I'll show you that in a second. And it just goes slightly more off center and then slightly less off center. So starting back at the valve hole and looking at basically where the wheel is sitting in relation to the 2 guides over here, I'm going to start with turning the right side spokes a little bit tighter, skipping a left side spoke, right side spoke a little bit tighter, again skipping a left and going to the next right hand side one, half a turn there, skipping the left, a little more than a quarter of a turn on the right side there, skipping the left, and then quite a bit. I can feel the spoke is much looser, so I'm going to go 1.5 turns, a little bit more than 1.5 turns, then skipping, going to the next right side spoke, Again, I can see that now the gap is getting really bad, so the right hand one needs a good full, almost 2 turns there. So now we're at the point where we have to start getting a little bit more accurate. The wheel is pretty close to true. It's running almost exactly in the middle of the 2 markers on my wheel trimming stand. So I'm back at my valve hole. There's my valve hole over there. And now I'm going to go around the wheel and I'm just going to start getting those spoke tensions up. So the wheel's pretty close to right, keeping in mind that this is going to have about a 25-30 kilogram little girl on it. I don't want the wheels to be too stiff because they won't feel compliant to her and they'll feel uncomfortable to ride. I get my wheel spoke tensions up very high because of my weight. I weigh like almost 100 kilograms riding, but yeah, she's going to be 25-30 kilograms, so I'm going to be a little bit more gentle on that for her. So I'm now just going around the wheel and I'm tightening each spoke by a half a revolution. So I'm trying to keep my centering as close to where it is currently as possible and just get the spoke tensions up. As I go around, I'm going to feel that this spoke, for example, feels loose. So I'm going to just turn it a full revolution and then just make sure that it stays central. So when I get to my next spoke, I can then go back and I can just run the wheel back through the wheel trimming stand or through the gauge, and I can see that it's still centered. So I'm going through, as I say, this is a bit of a time-consuming task to do it really, really well. You have to try and make sure that you're always running through sort of in small steps and not trying to do huge steps at the same time. So once I've got my wheel running pretty much in the center, I've had the gauges quite far apart here just because it can touch and it becomes a bit annoying. So I had them about 2 or 3 millimeters away from the rim. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the gauge in closer and see the places where it touches. So I know that at this point here near the valve hole I've got a little bit of a touch on the one side. So I'm just going to pull it over a little bit, over there, and I can spin it through, and then here I've got a touch exactly on the opposite side from the valve hole in the other direction, so I'm just going to pull that a little ways over. And what I'm doing here is I'm trying to pull 2 spokes a little bit rather than 1 spoke a lot, so that you keep the tension even on the spokes. So instead of, if I knew that it would take a full rotation of this spoke over here to pull the wheel across, instead of doing 1 full rotation, I can do like a quarter here, a quarter on the spoke on either side of it, and then I get basically the same effect, but my spoke tension remains the same across the wheel. So basically now the way it is, all the spokes on this side, on my right side, feel about the same, and all the spokes on the left hand side feel around about the same. So now I've got one other thing I need to check. So before I can pull the wheel out of the wheel trimming stand for the first time, I want to check that there's no hop in this wheel. As you can see, in this area here, I don't know if you'll be able to see it that well, but I'm basically making sure that the distance between the gauge here and the rim remains the same all the way around the rim. Now you can see this one is good. It does happen from time to time that when you build a wheel for the first time, you don't have perfect spoke tension or perfect spoke lengths, and then you end up with a wheel that's shifted to one side. So it'll be close here and then far away on the other side. The way to correct that is on the side where it's too close to the gauge here, you're going to pull those spokes a little bit tighter, and then on the exact opposite side of the wheel, you'll turn the wheel 180 degrees, and on the exact opposite side, you'll loosen the spokes. And that should shift the wheel over. It's a tough one, and if you get to that point, you'd probably want to go to a bike shop or something like that to get that sorted out. So now I know that my spokes are all pretty much the same tension on either side of the wheel. So the same on all the spokes on one side are the same, and all the spokes on the other side are the same, and my wheel's running pretty true. But I've been tensioning up and stressing all these spokes as I've been tensioning them up. So now what I have to do is de-stress them or de-tension them with a little trick. Let me show that to you now. So if any of you have ever bought a new bike or had your wheels done at a bike shop or something like that, and then climbed on your bike and they make like a pinging noise, that's because the spokes weren't de-stressed before the wheel was put back into the bike or before the bike was sent out. That's what we're going to do now. So what you do is you put your hands on either side of the rim and you simply press down all the way around the rim. And now what you're going to have to do is put the wheel back in the wheel trimming stand and see what it looks like. So again, pretty easy. That happens when you build wheels with the correct length spokes and good nipples and good start on with good rims. These Spank rims are really high quality, so the whole package is pretty good. The hub isn't really high end, but it's the stock hub that came with Ileana's Process 24, and it's relatively good quality hub and perfect. So there you have it. That is the process of tensioning out the spokes in your wheels and making sure the wheel is true. So thanks again for watching. I hope you learned something from this. Peter, I hope you got something out of this. This one was specifically for you. Thanks for the suggestion. It's I really enjoy building wheels. It's a really cool, relaxing thing to do. I can sit down and build a set of wheels, and I feel very calm doing it. It's you have to focus on the job at hand, so you kind of have to block everything else out, and that helps. It's almost like a kind of meditation. I really have pretty much enjoyed building wheels since I learned how to build wheels about 15 years ago now. If you've got any suggestions for videos for the future, please drop a comment in the comment box below. As usual, like, share, subscribe, all that sort of thing. And ride safe. Until next time. Cheers.